Well, it's a nice Saturday morning out here in the garage, and instead of getting to ride the XR like I wanted, I'm diagnosing problems. Once again, more idle problems with this sucker. The thing I fixed before, where it would hunt and rev up and everything when it was cold, that's been fine. But now it's developed an issue that after it's gotten hot and I'm running it, I'll come to a stop, either it'll idle super slow up to just completely dying, or it'll idle up like 2,000 RPMs. And sometimes when I start it, once it's hot, it will barely idle, or it'll stick at like 2,000 RPMs and won't come down till I blip the throttle a couple times. So right now I'm looking at either the throttle position sensor or the vehicle speed sensor can cause issues. So what we got to do is I'm going to take the dyno jet and we're going to mount it up to the handlebar. So I had to do a little fabrication work. Made a nice little metal plate, 1/4 hole in the center for a ram mount ball. We'll bolt that on the back and then should be able to fasten it up on my ram mount here so I can keep an eye on it. See which sensor is going bad. Because I looked at the idle steps last night when it was over revving, and it was actually commanding the idle control motor to rev high. So it's not an air leak or something like that. It's actually something going on with the bike as far as telling it to idle fast. Apparently, if it reads anything besides 0 miles an hour, then it jumps out of idle mode. And like it was running like you'd have the throttle open. So that could be messing it up. And I also noticed that when I'm stopped occasionally, when the motor is off and I will mess with the throttle, sometimes it doesn't always come back down to 0. It will hang at 1. Now, I haven't seen it do that when the motor's running with the vibration and everything. It always goes back to 0. But that's something I'll be able to see on this deal while I'm riding. So hopefully we'll figure out what's wrong. All right, we're on there, set up. Time to go for a little ride, see if I can figure out what's going on. Well, I just got back from a 100-mile ride and it was still messing up. So I've got more information now. This setup worked great. It shakes just a little bit at idle, but once you get moving, it's fine, nice and solid. I could run like that all the time. Just need to, if I wanted it on there more permanent, just find a better place to run the wire. What I did notice was that it's not the speed sensor and it's not the throttle position sensor. They're both working properly. You come to a stop, they're right at 0, so that's not the issue. I did notice that when I fire it up, after it's set and at high idles, when you turn the key on, it goes to 85 steps on the idle air controller, and then when it fires up and hangs at a high idle, it just never moves off 85 till you lift the throttle. And then when it was kind of interesting to watch what it does as you're riding. If you're riding under power, the idle air controller stays at like 50, 55 steps where it would normally idling. But as soon as you close the throttle, decelerating, it drops down to like 35. Apparently to cut off more airflow. Throttle plate's closed, you don't want a bunch of air coming through the idle circuit as you're decelerating. And then when you come to a stop, it instantly goes back up to the 55 range, so you get a nice idle. But when it would stumble, and well, not really stumble, it just wouldn't idle fast enough if you come to a stop. It was staying at the 35 steps. So I'm assuming that the idle air controller is just probably gummed up. And as soon as I Googled IAC on these things, I got lots of threads of it doing the same thing that mine is, that yeah, it's probably gummed up. And like a dumbass, when I had the whole induction unit off the other day working on the throttle plate and cleaned out the inside of the boards there, I didn't take it off and clean it then. So I'm gonna pop it off now, see what it looks like. Hopefully that'll fix the problem. Well, taking this thing off the bike was a piece of cake. A couple of screws, really didn't have to take anything else off. Got to be careful with the screws because they got some pretty heavy duty Loctite on them. So I don't think it's probably supposed to take this apart exactly like this, but I plugged it back in out of the motor and On Power Vision, you have a idle air controller reset. I reset it a couple times. It basically screws this plunger out till it bottoms out and then retracts it a certain amount. Well, if you do that a couple of times without it being in the vehicle or in the bike, it'll completely unscrew itself. So it all fell out on the floor, and I'm like, well, that's nice. But that does give me the opportunity to clean down in there, get some of this old nasty crusty grease off of it, and re-lubricate it. I've got some real high temp Teflon grease, and we'll spray everything out with some CLP, stuff you use on guns. So then put it back together and put it in there and see what happens. Then I had thought about coming up with a way to, if this keeps giving me trouble, to just do it manually, like on the Buell, and just not have an idle air controller. Well, as I was Googling around, somebody's already come up with that idea. It's basically this flange with a pintle like this and a knob back here. Fortunately, the thing was like $200, but and they were complaining they didn't like the high idle on startup, and you could just set it wherever you wanted and it worked fine, and these give you trouble. And it's like, yep, I understand. So that is always a possibility, but I'd like to get this to where it just works like it's supposed to. Then I'd be happy because I can turn the high idle off. I've already done that with the Power Vision. So this just needs to work. Okay, the way I got that screwed back in there is you could screw the pintle in a couple of turns, and then there's flats on the edges that hold this solid while the motor turns on the shaft in there. So you can't just screw it back up in there. So I screwed it on as far as I could, lined up the slots, held it like this, and then hit the reset. And what that does is it tries to screw it all the way out to where it bottoms out in the motor. Then it retracts it. So if you hold it, it thinks it's all the way out, and then it screws it back in. So I did that a couple times, and it just pulled it in. So it should be good to put back on the motor now, do another reset, and get it set where it's supposed to be, and then it should be good to ride. All right, all the parts are back in there. So we just need to do a final idle trim reset to get the plunger in the right position. And that's just as easy as going to Vehicle Tools, Reset Trims, and Reset Idle Trim. And it did its thing, and I tell you what, it was a lot quieter than the last times I've done an idle trim. So I'd say it probably was a little dry and hanging up, so might as well fire it up. And as you just heard, that fixed absolutely nothing. Went right up to over 2,000 RPMs, 98 steps on there, and would not come down till I blipped the throttle. Let's try it one more time. Then we're going to have a Harley barbecue. What I just did is went back to the original tune before I changed anything in the idle. This shouldn't have anything to do with the way it starts hot and as far as keeping it up at a higher RPM. But as you can see now, it's trying to start at 155 steps because that one initial setting is higher, because earlier it was 95. So we'll see what it does this time when it fires up. Damn thing. Still went and hung at 85 steps for whatever reason. So I had to figure out something else. Well, after some more experimenting, I was able to get it to idle down after startup, but I had to make sure that the throttle position sensor was reading absolute zero, not flickering between the 0 and 1%. According to the service manual, unless it's over 1%, it shouldn't mess with the idle. But consistently, if it was jiggling back and forth, it would hang up and not idle down. And if it was flat 0, then it would idle down and run just perfect. So I checked the throttle plate. You know, I've had this apart, fixed the throttle plate where it was loose. Maybe something got a little out of whack there. There doesn't appear to be any adjustment like on a car or TPS where you can rotate the sensor. So what we're going to do is adjust the stop. I'm going to back it out and see how much it closes by backing it out, because the throttle plate really needs to be shut all the way. And there is a little bit of gap around it. So, and you can hear when you work the throttle, it's actually hitting this. So back that out, get that as close to closed as possible. Check it with the vision, make sure we're at 0 and see how it works there. I had to go get a set of sockets for that because it's one of those tamper resistant jobs, but I run into them every once in a while. I needed a set of those anyway. So I'm going to back that out and see what happens. I am starting to lose my Harley enthusiasm. I was going to adjust this thing. Now that I looked down in there, I couldn't find a bit that would fit it out of that new set. It's the safety kind with the button in the middle, but it's not Torx. It's not 6 points, it's 5. So I have nothing to unscrew that with. So, since I was losing patience, I just grabbed a file and I filed the bottom of the damn screw off. Not off, but you can definitely hear now that it is the, well, you probably can't in the video, but you can hear now that it's the throttle plate that's bottoming out about the same time as that. So, and when I look at it up on the gauge, oh, blinded by the ring light. Yeah, see, she always goes to 0 now. Where before, sometimes it would be jumping back and forth. So we're going to put it back together and give that a try. Well, I'm done for now. It's still not right. I can get that thing to stay at 0 when I'm blipping the throttle with it turned off. The TP percent stays right at 0. I hit the starter button. It'll jump up to 1 or 2%. Not moving the throttle, even holding it closed, it will jump up a little bit. The idle will hang at about 2,000 RPM, and it'll sit there and flicker from 0 to 1. I blip the throttle a couple of times. It will then go to 0, and the idle instantly starts coming down. So I think I've just got a bad throttle position sensor. I mean, it could be a bad connection in the wiring, but it's not. Obviously not something with the TPS itself, because I've had that off. I've checked the connections. I could check the voltage because, you know, it gets 5 volts from the computer to run the sensor, but I'm not going to mess with that right now. I would just assume just put on a new sensor, try it. If that doesn't fix it, I've got a spare part for later, but it's just a little bit annoying. But I'll get it fixed. But like I said, I think it's a throttle position sensor, and I almost bought one of those today. So now I'm going to have to wait till Tuesday till the Harley shops open up, see if they've got one. Fits a lot of models, so hopefully they do. Till next time, thanks for watching.